Now, we're going to move on back to the notes, and I'd like you to look on page 67, that's where we're starting, and we're going to look at what happens when we multiply the function sine, cos, or tan by a number. How does that change the graph? Because it's going to change the graph in a very specific way. So we're going to look at two things: multiplying the whole function like this, or multiplying the angle, because it does two different things. Before we even look at what that does, I want to give you some definitions. Sorry. We need to know these two things: period and range. So you'll remember from a couple of days ago, I mentioned that sine and cosine and tan are what we call periodic functions. And periodic functions means that they repeat, and they repeat after a certain amount of time. That's where the period idea came from. Or rather than time, after a certain number of angles, after a certain number of degrees. So the period of a function is the distance on the x-axis before the function repeats. So how soon does it repeat? And if we look here, this red line is the graph of sine of x. So this is sine of x. And we can see that it completes a full wave pattern up and down between 0 degrees and 360 degrees. So every 360 degrees, sine of x repeats its same shape, which means that we can write down this fact about sine of x. The period of sine of x, the period of sine of x, or sine of theta, doesn't matter, is 360 degrees. It means it repeats every 360 degrees. So we need to know that as a fact. The second thing we talk about, so that's about the distance on the x-axis. The range is the distance on the y-axis. So the range is the distance, the min and max values, the range of values, the min and max values for the output of it on the y-axis that the function goes between. And of course we can see, looking at our red graph again, and we knew this, the maximum value that sine of x ever gets to is 1. So we already knew that. And the maximum value, or the minimum value that sine of x ever gets to is -1. So the range of sine of x, and we write it like this, is -1 to +1. We'll write it like that. The range of sine of x is between -1 and +1. So then, what happens when we multiply the function? Well, whatever value we had for sine of x, we multiply it by 2. The 2 times 0 gives you 0, 2 times a half gives you 1, 2 times 1 gives you 2, 2 times minus a half gives you -1, 2 times -1 gives you -2. Nothing changes in terms of how quickly it repeats, but when you multiply the whole function by a number, so when you multiply the whole function of sine of x by a number, you increase its range. You increase how far up and down on the y-axis it goes. You increase its range by that number. The period doesn't change. So the period doesn't change. Okay, so multiplying the whole function changes the range. Of course, if I multiplied by a fraction, I would decrease the range. I would shrink it, and this is important. The period doesn't change. So the period is going to change when we multiply the angle, and we'll be looking at that tomorrow. What that means is that when I talk about the function 2 times sine of x, the period is still 360 degrees, or if you did it in radians, 2 pi radians, and the range is now -2 to +2. So -2, my minimum value, to +2, my maximum value there. If I had a different number in front of sine of x, if I had 5 sine of x, without even drawing it, I can know that the period would stay the same, it would stay as 360 degrees, and the range would be -5 to 5. If I had a fraction, say 2/3 multiplied by sine of x, just about fit that in, again the period wouldn't change, that would stay at 360 degrees, and the range would be -2/3 to +2/3. So whatever that number is in front, that's the one that shows up in the range. Exactly the same thing happens with cosine of x. So if you look at the graph here, we're looking at 2 cos x. So we're only multiplying the angle in front. Cosine goes between -1 and 1 as well. So when I talk about the basic cosine of x, its range is -1 to 1. And its period, how long does it take it to repeat? Starts at 0 degrees, comes down, back up at 1 when I get to 360 degrees. 360 degrees, or 2 pi radians. Then, if I multiply it, 2 times cosine of x, the range will increase -2 to 2, and the period will still stay the same at 360 degrees. 0.5 by cosine of x, my range becomes -1/2 to +1/2, and the period stays the same. So hopefully that makes sense. Now, I'm going to stop there for today because we had quite a bit of homework already. So I'm not going to give you any homework on this tonight. I want to get through what happens when we multiply the angles before we do some homework on this. So you'll have homework tomorrow. For tonight, all I want you to do is familiarize yourselves with what happens when you multiply the function of sine or the function of cosine by a number, and to learn these definitions, a period and a range, because you need to know what those words mean. You can be asked them. Okay, thank you.